We're going to get underway. Hi, I'm Steve Bonoff with Printing Industry Midwest. I want to welcome companies from all over the country today. This is an event called the SmartCafe, and we're welcoming members of associations from across North America that are part of our alliance of associations, formerly of the Printing Industry of America. And we are really excited to have you here today about a topic that is always on the lips of print service providers of when to make the investment and then how to manage that investment so it actually works to build your company. And of course, I'm talking about Inkjet. Today, this event, of course, will be recorded. The slides will be made available by our moderator and expert, Elizabeth Gooding. At the close of today, we will be getting it out to all of our association managers who will then be providing you a copy of the presentation. Wanted to do just a little bit of a housekeeping. This is a webinar, so it does have a Q&A format, meaning that if you post a question, we can answer that question live or hold it over until an appropriate time. But that question then stays around. You can read it post or after, and versus a chat, which can get confusing because it gets kind of a jumbled mess. If you have a technical problem, please chat it into our staff. We'll be happy to help you. Otherwise, chat a question into Elizabeth using the Q&A function. And then we're going to be monitoring that and supporting Elizabeth with those questions as we go. So I want to bring on Elizabeth Gooding. I think we're really lucky to have her here, and there's a couple points that I want to make. Elizabeth is going to do a much better job than I could do of sharing who she is and where she's coming from. But you know what I wanted to make sure that everybody knew is that she is an independent voice. She is not necessarily driven by any particular OEM or any particular technology. She's really going to be talking from a thought leadership perspective because she's been running Inkjet Insight from the start at 2017. This is a deep dive that she does every day, and she knows it just about as well as anybody in the industry. So I think we're really lucky to have this perspective on Inkjet today from Elizabeth. So thank you so much for being here, and we're really looking forward to your perspective today.
Steve, thanks so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Thank you. So please, I think we're ready. Take it away. And again, welcome to all our affiliate partners. I think Chris just put the names of all of them in our chat. And so thanks for being here. And Elizabeth, we're looking forward to a great session.
Thanks again. Okay, well then I'll take it away and get us started and look at what we're going to talk about today. So as Steve mentioned, I am independent. I am not beholden to any OEM. And I also have a little bit of a different background than perhaps some other analysts out there that you might encounter. One is I ran a company for nearly 20 years that did design of transaction communications and direct mail, as well as automation of those. So we had the first software as a service platform for composition tools, high volume composition. And we were quite often in the position of going out and finding printing organizations for our customers, because while we did the composition, we did not print. Sometimes that was sending the information back to an in-plant print production or into a third-party commercial print for pay organization. So background with design, the automation technology, and the print going back quite a few years, and a lot of experience getting everybody to play nice. I also have a lot of experience with the stories that were told to get people to move and adopt new technology. And I was sometimes the person raising my hand going, wait, I don't think that's quite true, which is how we ended up writing about a lot of the things we write about at Inkjet Insight. So today we're going to take a little bit of a look back at Inkjet with that perspective and say, you know, how did we get here and where the heck are we anyway? In terms of how Inkjet was marketed in the past, where it gained traction despite where it was marketed and how it was marketed, who's using Inkjet now and for what, and what happens when Inkjet comes into your market. And then, as Steve said, we're going to talk a bit about how you can get into new markets with inkjet. And with these types of presentations, I never quite know who's going to be in the audience, who has inkjet, who doesn't. So a lot of specifics we can cover in Q&A, but I think this will provide a good foundation to get you guys started on what's out there and what the possibilities are. So first of all, let's kind of set the Wayback Machine here to some of the early days of inkjet, when the OEMs really took kind of a field of dreams approach to marketing their products, and like, if you build it, they will come. They were really pushing color to transaction printers, particularly at a time when the color really wasn't that great. It was kind of business color. But the positioning was that, oh, marketing really, really wants this color. And if you just add these color presses, you're going to have so much more business. This is going to be great. They positioned color as the enabler of personalized messaging. And at the end of the day, they kind of really forgot who the transaction printing customer was. Because even if marketing wanted color, and even if the color at the time was good enough to satisfy those marketers, that's not who transaction printers sold to. Transaction printers worked with the operations groups. They often were quite separate from the marketing areas. The other thing that they got wrong is pushing the fact that personalization required dynamic color. Dynamic color is great for personalization, don't get me wrong. But at that time, there was plenty of so-called trans-promo production that was going on that was using those pre-printed shells and adding the personalized messaging. So this is an example from back in 2002 that won a whole bunch of awards for using personalized messaging to drive 11 different measurable actions that this particular retirement services provider was trying to execute on. It didn't have any, no inkjet, no color, but still personalized messaging, and it was very, very successful. So that promise that you needed the color to do the personalized messaging wasn't right. And then when they were trying to market it to companies to talk about the value of color, they put out all kinds of different samples and examples. And quite frankly, they were scary. This was not a good use of color. What they were doing was pretty frightening. Going back to 2008 and what InfoTrends published is the Trans Promo Revolution. A lot of the information that was in there about the value of personalization was true, but if a marketing group looked at this, I don't think this is necessarily what they wanted to jump on board with as the savior of their transaction printing business. So the bottom line is the OEMs were targeting the wrong problem. We saw similar things on the electronic billing side in a similar time frame, where the makers of that software said, oh, of course consumers are going to pay to have electronic bills. So we can charge a whole bunch and sell this to the consumers and everybody's going to buy it. Whereas the people who wanted electronic billing and were willing to pay for it were the business to business people, turning off all that accounts payable, accounts receivable type of communication. They just had the market wrong. So if we go back to the good old field of dreams, there's that part in the movie where the voice is saying, if you build it, they will come. And Annie Kinsella has the smarts to go, well, wait, if you build what? Who will come? And that's the question that somebody should have been asking with some of these inkjet questions, because marketing executives, which is who all the value proposition was built around, they were not the ones that started the inkjet revolution. And there was one, actually. So who did start it? Well, it was the transaction printers themselves. So what they found was that the ability to add this color, even if it was only business color, allowed them to completely redefine their workflow. So they looked at this in terms of what they needed to be efficient, to drive their costs down. So being able to eliminate role changes, eliminate pre-printed stocks, basically run more jobs together, take smaller jobs in addition to larger jobs, reduce the postal expenses for their customers, allowed them to get more business early on because a lot of people couldn't do that, reduce direct mail. by pulling pulling information dynamically into the customer mail versus sending it separately. Turning inserts into onserts or messaging into, dynamic messaging. And overall, even in the transaction print side, enabling what would have been some short run commercial print as well. So it was really the process needs that drove the color device sales, not marketing's demand for color. And really, at that time, if we go back to those early adopters, efficiency meant continuous inkjet. That's all there was. There was no cut sheet. So, all of those things that we talked about in terms of driving efficiency for the service providers also drove efficiency for their customers and made their business more effective. So they could sell more services to their customers. If they weren't charging an insert fee for dropping things in, they could still have similar charges for managing those dynamic messages and things like that. But the customers were able to reduce their procurement costs as well, get rid of wastage, get those postal efficiencies, and really key, those opportunities for personalization and versioning. And that's what drove things not just from transaction print, but over into that world of direct mail marketing as well. So now we started off with those early adopters in transaction printing, moving into direct mail, and now inkjet has entered many markets. Books have really taken off with books of one, both monochrome books, color books. The text legibility has allowed that to be very successful. Display graphics is huge. Commercial marketing collateral, and of course, these days, packaging and labels is huge, but also textiles and industrial, material deposition, 3D, all kinds of aspects that are inkjet as a core technology that's supporting that. The number of things that inkjet can print on effectively has just blown up with advances in ink, advances in coating, advances in the print heads themselves, advances in drying technology. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So where that takes us now is that inkjet's not just one thing. So when I get onto these webinars and talk to people about this, I'm like, well, inkjet is a big topic. I think with this group, we're talking primarily about production, single pass inkjet, possibly tippy-toeing over a little bit into the packaging and labels side of things, but not into some of those more industrial and newer applications. But even with that production, within that production inkjet segment, the needs of the different markets differ. So, transaction print, as we said, it's really about efficiency. The color needs have increased somewhat, but they just don't have the same demand that high-end direct marketing or graphic arts or even packaging do. And they print on different types of substrates as well, different underlying paper or other requirements. With direct marketing, the time to market enabled by going to inkjet, eliminating the process of having a pre-printed shell is really huge. With books, as inkjet progressed, the ability to have really, really good text and line density to make sure that readability on the book papers is good. And also, for many of them, the ability to switch easily back and forth between black and white and full color is important. And like many others, the workflow is fairly critical. When we get into graphic arts, really we start to see both very high coverage, vibrant color, wide gamut. In some cases, it's CMYK plus. You need to be able to deliver on coated stocks, uncoated stocks, and you need really good finishing compatibility as well. Packaging, again, packaging is not just one thing, right? We're talking about corrugated cardboard, folding carton, flexible packaging. You can throw some labels and other things in there. And we typically have to deal with the CMYK and often white. And sometimes we're getting into a 7-color press and things like that. So inkjet is in these markets. It's successful in these markets. It has different levels of adoption that we'll talk a little bit about in a minute, but very versatile. And in the applications on the left-hand side here, transaction direct marketing books, it is primarily aqueous inkjet, whereas the graphic arts and packaging, we're seeing aqueous as well as UV. But what happens is that as inkjet evolves to support these new markets and provide better quality, the markets are evolving along with it. So let's take a look at some data here. If you look back to 2019, and I don't think this has changed dramatically since 2019 in terms of the adoption, because they're just the unit sales weren't massive during COVID. About 25% of transaction print sites have production inkjet. So that means 75% don't. Around 20% of direct mail sites have production inkjet. About 80% don't, okay? And if we look on the right, we see the page volume, well, it's on my right, you're seeing it, the page volume share by print technology. So looking at inkjet, toner, and offset. So in the transaction print, it's about 57% of the volume, and I think that actually has grown a bit since 2019 is inkjet and 43% toner. So inkjet had already overtaken toner at that time. And then if we look at direct mail, it's 48% offset, 42% inkjet, and about 9% toner. And again, I think inkjet is creeping up in that market as well. Now, and this data is a drill down from material from IT Strategies, which is a great source for research if you have an opportunity to look at them. But what I found interesting about this is if you overlay who has inkjet with the volume, what this basically tells you is that 25% of transaction printers who have inkjet control more than 50% of the volume. And same kind of thing in direct mail, 20% of those direct mail sites that have inkjet are controlling 40% of the volume. Okay, so that leaves the folks who don't have inkjet as the majority of companies fighting for the minority of page volume. And that's not a particularly happy place to be. Also, when you consider the fact that a lot of the early adopters of inkjet were the large companies, it puts the smaller companies at even more of a challenge, even more of a disadvantage to be able to compete with that volume and control that they have. So that's causing a shift in the market right there, and a lot of contraction and acquisitions and things like that. So as inkjet drives the evolution of business models, the segments that people are in don't stay static. So one of the facts about inkjet is it loves to run. And the more volume that you place on your device, the more cost effective it is. So it actually drives down your running costs to get the availability on the machine down, right? So if you're running at that 75, 80% capacity or as high as you reasonably can, the more shifts, the better, the more money you're going to make. So that makes the people who have inkjet volume hungry. And you know what? They look around, they say, I've got color now. I can do other things. I can print on different substrates, perhaps, than what I was doing before. So what happens now is we find people who may call themselves a transaction printer or call themselves a direct mail marketer actually don't do the majority of their work necessarily in that segment. So some research that we looked at, again, back in 2019, and I'm going to check my notes to make sure I get all this right, but we looked at 60 companies in transaction print, and only 28% of those companies earned more than 80% of their revenue from transaction printing. Now, with transaction printing, you say, okay, well, maybe that includes, e-delivery, archiving services, and some other things. But 58% earned more than half of their revenue outside of transaction printing, and that's pretty significant. If you look at direct mail, 70% earned more than half of their revenue outside of direct mail production. So 17% of companies earned more than 80% of their revenue from direct mail services. So the minority of people calling themselves a direct mailer are actually doing most of their work in direct mail. And we see this a lot. We see basically once people get inkjet, they say, hey, I can evolve. I can do more things for my customers. I can keep these inkjet presses busy. And they're looking all around for that volume. They're trying to take it from um, reducing pre-printed stock from companies that they may have gotten offset work from, but they're also pulling digital volumes from other competitors. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the transaction printing and direct marketing aspect of this, but there's also commercial printing and graphic arts. And over the past few years, this is the printing pie that all the OEMs and everybody else wants a piece of, because this is where most of the volume is. And even though the majority of that is still analog, it's really green pastures for new inkjet presses. That's where most of the OEM development has gone in the past 5 years, and it's been successful. Commercial organizations are investing in inkjet. Inkjet's making inroads there. Part of what helped with that is the introduction of sheet-fed inkjet, but also even on the roll-fed platforms, um, really improved substrate compatibility. That's what's opening doors. So in some cases, the color was already very, very good quite a few years ago, but it wasn't good on a coated stock. It was kind of like Kool-Aid sprayed on a windshield, and that's not what you like to see in your printing. So let's talk about some of the developments that have come just in the past, and when they came in terms of driving the graphic arts and commercial adoption. There certainly weren't as many press announcements as we would have hoped to have seen in 20 and 21 with the delay of Drupa and delay of Drupa again. But some companies did get out there and made their announcements. So from the sheet fed side on the market, as opposed to just a few years ago, we have aqueous B1, B2, and B3 sheet sizes available. So we have the Fujifilm J Press, the 750S is the most recent one. It's been upgraded in speed. The J Press has actually been around for a long time and delivering really amazing quality for a long time with an aqueous sheet fed device. It's a B2, um, but it does not automatically perfect. So if companies needed automatic duplex, then that wasn't the device for them. But if you're doing sign in display or a lot of other markets, it just runs and runs and runs. Or if you're in an offset environment where you've got operators who are used to flipping sheets anyway, then it can be quite successful. Um, some of the big news on the aqueous front a few years ago was the original Canon VarioPrint series, and then they launched the IX series in 2020, which upped the game for more compatibility, higher resolution, etc. Um, but as a B3 press, this is going in places where they want multiple stocks and don't need that B2 sheet type of approach. Xerox Baltoro is also serving a similar market. They came out in 2019, did some color upgrades and compatibility upgrades in 2020. Again, it's a multi-sheet B3 type of device. I would say there's more of the Canon Vario prints going into a commercial and graphic arts environment than a Baltoro, but the Baltoro has been selling a lot of units in the last couple of years. And then we've got the Lambda S10 and S10P, which are an aqueous sheet-fed device, and they're that great big B1 platform. The S10P is their perfecting or automatic duplex press. They have a little bit of a different format in that they actually transfer the ink onto a blanket before transferring it onto the substrate, which gives them very strong substrate compatibility across a wide variety of materials. But it is also a very high entry cost, and if you're printing on B1, you better have the volume to back it up, or you're not going to get those inkjet efficiencies that we talked about before. Other devices that have been available on the market for quite a few years are the B2 presses that are UV, the Konica Minolta KM1E, and the Komori Impremia IS29. So again, these are inkjet, but they're UV. So on the one hand, they've got great substrate compatibility with the UV and very, very durable finish on what they print. On the other hand, the ROI on comparing a UV inkjet press to, say, toner is not quite the same. The inks are quite a bit more expensive typically than aqueous inks, but a lot of companies have them, are very happy. They run and run and run, and the print quality is very, very, very strong. So then the other thing we see on the commercial side are getting the roll-fed presses into this commercial market. And there's 3 different types of print heads that are out there serving this. So the piezo, the thermal, and the continuous inkjet. So on the piezo side, we saw this year the introduction of the Canon ProStream 1800, which is roughly, as it says, about 1,800 images per minute, and just really, really great quality. So they've upped the resolution on the press, and also they have a pre-coating that enables some of that ink compatibility. Unlike the sheet-fed side on the Vario print, which will put the primer just only where needed, this is actually, it coats the whole sheet. As compared to the Ricoh Pro VC 70,000, which has an ink that enables the compatibility with the different substrates. So it will actually print on coated stocks without the need for any primer. And they're one of the few that will do that. Also in kind of the same category of the very high-end piezo presses is the Screen True Press Jet 520 HD. And that's now available with their new SC inks, and they also have enhanced dryers that support that. And if we go back for a minute to, I guess, both the Ricoh and the Canon ProStream, if you look at these devices, they're getting really long because the drying is so critical to handle the high coverage that graphic arts entails, and the wide gamut, etc. So one of the things you want to look at is to make sure you have space for some of these devices, because they want to get room in there for that drying. The Ricoh has a very innovative kind of multi-approach drying solution, and the Screen True Press also put a lot of emphasis on their new dryers as well. And then we get to HP and the thermal inkjet heads and their enhancements with the T250 HD, which came out in 2020. Also, just really pretty amazing quality. The inks for the thermal presses as well as the continuous inkjet presses tend to have fewer VOCs than some of the piezo ones, if that matters for a food-related application or sustainability that you're trying to do. HP also updated their press with a new priming solution and eliminated the need for, they used to have 2 solutions, one to help with uncoated stock and one to help with coated stocks. Now they have a single solution that does both and really kind of boosted the color gamut, getting some amazing quality out of there as well. And then the Kodak Prosper Ultra 520 was announced in 2021 and should be hitting the market soon. It's a continuous inkjet head, which if you look on Inkjet Insight, there's actually several articles talking about the difference in these heads and some of the benefits, more than I can go into here. But there's some interesting things about what Kodak has done with the continuous inkjet heads, the very fine pigment ink that they use, the benefits of how the ink recirculates in terms of the efficiency and drop control and the ability to throw from a distance effectively to the substrate. So some of the overall trends that we see going on here that are driving this are the accessibility. So there's some lower cost sheet fed presses that are there, but also higher resolution, enhanced drying, the compatibility with all kinds of offset grades, so the uncoated as well as the coated, as well as things like Teslin and other products, sometimes without using a priming solution or with it. We call the magic pigment ink on some of them that allows them to stick to these substrates without a primer. The other thing that's really important on some of these presses, on the piezo and the thermal, is that some of the OEMs have added nozzle compensation systems. So that's again something, if you look on Inkjet Insight, you can dig into a bit how those work. So some of the nozzle compensation systems, they're essentially doubling the number of heads to allow to account for jet outs. So that, if one head is out, another one can jump in and take its place. But you also want to understand that relative to the use of the full potential resolution that head is designed for, because it may say our resolution is 1600, but in fact it's using part of that as nozzle compensation, not actually to print when it's in the full quality mode. Also, an important thing to look at on these is some of them for productivity. If you want the highest quality, it's going to go at a lower speed. And if you want the highest speed, it's going to drop a little bit in quality. But honestly, for most applications, the quality difference is really negligible. So, run your tests, take a look. The other trend is inline quality control systems. So they have inline spectrophotometers and other color management solutions that really ensure that you're going to have end-to-end consistency, or that you can stop a job before you run 1,000 pages and go, oops, we got a problem. So that makes a very big difference. The other thing about inkjet in general, if you don't have it and you haven't worked with it, is once you dial in color on a press and you profile and you linearize to a particular substrate, it tends to be very, very consistent. So it's not like the older toner presses, which tend to be wobbly from the front to the back of a run, and even offset presses where you have to watch for consistency. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the evolution of the presses, where they've been going, what's driving quality, and also how it impacts the market and evolves those markets. So if you don't have inkjet, or if you have inkjet and you don't use it for all the things that you could, basically you don't evolve, well, what happens? Well, if you're in a growth market like packaging, or you have a particular niche market where you're just solid, well, great. But let's face it, most of print is in a declining market, some more than others. So if you're in a declining market and you don't have the flexibility to change and do more things with the presses you own, you're not in a very good competitive position. So some markets really mutated along with COVID. And companies who had inkjet and even some other kinds of presses were really able to pivot and change and go after those new markets. So like display graphics, a lot of people jumped in and said, yeah, we're going to do those stay back 6 feet signs, or, who knew these days that everybody was going to have their own personalized front lawn sign in there talking about what their personal political credo was. Those are things that got printed. Books had a big resurgence during COVID. And there was crossover with people who didn't used to print books doing some aspect of books, even workbooks, different formats of textbooks for learning at home. And of course, packaging just took off like nobody's business. So if you are in a declining market, you got to look at the markets on either side of you, because there's only 3 ways to grow. You're either going to get eaten by somebody else, and sometimes that's the goal of a small company, is to position themselves for that, to eat somebody else or be eaten by somebody else, or you're going to evolve your market. And let's talk about how you evolve and try to walk into some new markets and do different things? Well, you have to think a little bit about being a revolutionary, and that might be with just within your own company saying, what else can we do? What else can we do with what we have? What are the changes that we can make to be able to do more things, and how do I get the movement within my own company to make that happen? So even if you do color now, if you don't have inkjet, then you're potentially looking at expanding your color capabilities and learning new skills. If you're in transaction print, where, yeah, you're using color, but you may need to really expand your color capabilities and understand more about that if you're going to move into direct mail marketing or signage or any of these other markets, or even potentially aspects of packaging, labels, things like that. You really have to understand what color means in the market that you're going after. Remember those really scary examples I showed you at the beginning of the presentation? Don't be that guy. That's not what you want to do. You also need to adapt your pricing to the value of what you're offering. So not just the cost, not just saying, hey, it's cheaper to print with inkjet, so I'm going to drop my pricing. That doesn't do you any good. You just end up at the same spot you are now doing it faster. My friend Marco Bohr likes to say the race to the bottom. That's not where we want to be. So again, go back and understand the value of what you're doing to your customers and where you are in the market and adapt that pricing. So that could be with transaction printing, as we said earlier, that, well, I used to charge for each slot in my inserter for my selective inserting, and now that's going to go on my statement. How do I charge for that? Well, you can still charge for that. You can charge for how you manage those messages as content for the customer, and price appropriately. You also want to be careful to adapt your pricing based on coverage levels of the material that you're printing, because the ink is, that's one of your more expensive running costs. So someone who's just, putting a splash of color on the page, versus someone who's covering that entire page with ink, you want to make sure that you understand what it's costing to run. A little shout out to everybody who has good ink estimators. Use them before you price. Educate your sales and your customers about what this means as well, about how the pricing works, how things like roll changes cost money. So if you can standardize paper, that saves you a lot of money and makes you more efficient. But also that inkjet can have an amazing gamut, amazing print quality, still going to look different than toner and offset because it's different. It's not better or worse, it's different. So you want to make sure that you're showing them tint books, fingerprints, things like that help them understand, not only that it's different, but it's going to look different on different substrates. So put that material together. Try to sell to new departments. Like we said, if you're selling to operations or selling to one group, try to get broader access to the company so that you can sell into marketing. Sell to the department that's going to value what you do the most, even if they don't know that yet. Look at that new equipment. If you don't have it, make sure you have robust data skills. If you don't have them, find a partner. Everything. Books have data now. The direct marketing is data driven. Even packaging can, have versioning and QR codes and things like that you need to put on there. Localization, driving regulatory variations on labels and packaging and things like that by state, county, etc. You got to have some data skills to do that. Test new substrates. So if you already have inkjet, try new stuff. You might be able to enable some really cool new direct marketing, different materials for graphics. You could be printing hotel keys, all kinds of different things that you can do. Also, experiment with integration of inkjet into different processes. So inkjet integration is a whole field on its own. Everything from hybrid inkjet on offset or flexo to creating purpose-built presses. There's just a lot going on there. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another aspect, as we said, there's eat, be eaten, or evolve. Well, what companies might you want to partner with or acquire to get some of these new skills, right? So if you don't have the ability to move into all of those areas yourself, that could be an equipment shortage or it could be a labor issue. Look at possibly partnering with or acquiring complementary businesses to allow you to evolve into new places and mitigate risk. Okay, so let's talk a little bit just about that integration, those custom inkjet systems that I mentioned. Um, Many companies are building inkjet right into the product manufacturing or packaging process. So if you're a print for pay customer, this may not pertain to you, but it's interesting to kind of know what's going on there. So this could be packaging, labeling, direct to shape, direct to food, textiles, industrial, etc. But more commonly in the print for pay market, what you're seeing is retrofitting, creating a hybrid inkjet solution with some other sort of analog press. So most likely analog. It's not typically toner, but you could be doing it with something with toner. So this may be adding life to your old equipment by adding those inkjet heads to an offset press. Um, or expanding reach. Maybe you bought a new press and you just want to make that more versatile and allow that personalization and versioning to happen there. Um, Systems of all shapes and sizes and price points are happening. So there are, particularly in say labels and packaging or, printing of carrier bags, signage, things like that. I mean, entry level inkjet presses at under $30,000 to do some of those things. And if you think about it as a commercial printer, you say, well, why would I want to do that? Well, what if you're putting together a sample kit or any other type of sales material, and you can print all those sales materials and you can finish those and put those all together, and now you want to have some type of box to put those in. So you may buy the preformed box, and you could potentially be personalizing those for whoever the customer is to finish those samples and put those right in the carrier package. Lots of options to work with those hybrid systems and small OEMs. And then touching a minute on the complementary acquisitions. This is just an example. You can read more about this, but this is an example of a company, Semeta, that originally was an implant operation, and all they did was the commercial print on offset presses, production of all of the materials for a chain of grocery stores. And then a few years ago, they said, we're going to get inkjet. And they went from offset to completely inkjet, and at the same time said, we're going to start taking on outside business. They were so successful at that they quickly ramped up, bought additional presses, and then just, I believe it was last year, they bought another, really great company, which is Group Yos, and expanded into transaction printing. So, just really great example of how the move to inkjet helped this company reinvent themselves and be tremendously successful. And it touches on a whole bunch of different themes that we talked about today. So I encourage you to go out and learn a little bit more about this one. And there's several stories on our site as well. So again, why should you evolve? Why bother, right? Well, maybe you have great volumes right now, but we are, other than packaging, in many of these cases, in a declining market. So if those volumes are gone, you really don't have much choice. You have to think about what your options are. But there's also risk mitigation, right? So companies that may do well in the long term, in the situation we saw with COVID, some markets temporarily really plummeted. And the companies that had a workflow and a makeup of their press technology that allowed them to do different things and pivot quickly were able to recover and able to do different things. You can also drive customer loyalty, right? So the ability to not just do one thing for them, but do more things takes away the potential that you're going to end up working through some aggregator to deliver your services to the customer, because big clients like to have a fewer number of vendors, and in many cases, they're saying, "Oh, well, I don't do enough work with you. You have to go work through this company that's going to do nothing but make your life miserable and take a big chunk of what you want to charge to your customers." Um, Generally, again, there's just those inkjet economics that the more you can do, the more likely you are to be able to keep that inkjet press running and have the most economical use of that press that you can. So let's say that you did a business case justification and you said, yeah, I can afford this press if I can get it up to 40% capacity, 50% capacity. That means everything above that is absolutely gravy. So you want to be trying to find where you can get that. And of course, just generally, if you evolve, you can grow. Growing into new markets means growth. Growth is good. Um, but you have to be able to incent the right behaviors to make that happen. And that can be the challenge is, a lot of companies are real comfortable doing what they do. And they say, why should I do anything different? This is great. And I like to bring up this example from a book that I've been reading. It's by Andrew Main. It's called How to Make Money on Mars. It's a really interesting book, um, and it's literally about how um, how companies like SpaceX and Blue Horizon and all those other companies have made money on the space race. That it's not just about going to space. It's about all of the technology and improvements and capabilities that happen from doing that. So, launching satellites and things like that. And one of the points that he makes in the book is that, our NASA, Russia, other government space programs, they weren't founded with the goal of making a profit. And that's why it took 50 years to come up with a reusable rocket, right? They weren't getting paid for reuse. The whole space industrial complex was making billions of dollars on not having a reusable rocket, right? So, what's the incentive to get them to change? Um, you know, if if you don't push to do it, nobody else is going to do it because they're not getting paid to do it. So, my favorite quote from Elon Musk, he said, is that trying to build the space industry on single-use rockets is like trying to build the airline industry on planes that crash on landing. Um, and it's when you look back on it, it's really obvious. But when you're living it, you think, yeah, of course, we're going to just focus on getting the best rocket and not worried about have it being reusable. In 2011, when Elon Musk announced that he was developing a reusable rocket technology, most space industry experts thought it was impossible. But within 5 years, it was a reality. NASA had estimated that it would have cost about $4 billion to develop the Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX spent $390 million and delivered both the Falcon 1 and the Falcon 9. So, in the time it takes NASA to have a study done, solicit the contractors, get funding, kick off a project, SpaceX is on their third or fourth iteration of development. So, this is an example of, companies with a lot at stake, right? But they couldn't see past the way they did it. I highly recommend the book. I don't think it was intended as a business management primer, but I think it makes a really good one. Um, and it's not that the engineers at SpaceX are necessarily smarter than the government contractors at Boeing and Lockheed, but they have the latitude to work in the most efficient way. They're incented to be profitable, and they don't have to worry about saying we're going to do what we did before. Um, so when you think about that, if you open your mind and say, what could we be doing? Where would you grow? What businesses would you be in? Maybe Inkjet's the right fit for that. Maybe it's not. But try to get out of the mindset of this is how we always did it, because you could be doing something even better. So lead the revolution. Look at those new markets, look at new skills. Make sure that you empower, and motivate your employees to come to you with new ideas to say, hey, what if we tried this? Could we print on this new substrate? Could we be in this new market? You don't necessarily want the salespeople out there selling things that you haven't tried yet, but if they come to you with an opportunity, evaluate it. Is this a new market that may happen? Don't be afraid to disrupt your own business. That might be your best chance of success. If you look at that example that I said earlier with Semeta, they said, you know what? Offset printer's gone. Um, I will with ending with that is this doesn't need to mean that if you buy inkjet that your offset printers are gone. I've also talked to several companies out there who said that they have offset and they have inkjet. And there's offset business that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't have inkjet, and there's inkjet business that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't have offset. It's in many cases those multi-platform campaigns and that flexibility is what really can drive good competitive positioning. So with that said, I would love to take your questions. I also wanted to note on that last slide, if you look in the lower right, we encourage you to go and drill down on these topics. We have a lot of detail on the site, not only about calculators on inkjet, um, RFP checklists for inkjet, looking at how different types of heads and inks and coatings and dryers work, what that means to evaluate that, but also drilling down on different market segments and looking at different companies that have inkjet. And we have a device finder that you can look at that gives you all of the details on the different devices in terms of um, their size, their resolution, their speed, the technology they use, and really a deep dive in there. So you can get 90 days of free membership on there, so you can get at the premium content as well as the free content, and go to some other Inkjet Explainer webinars as well. So with that said, gang, are there any questions from the folks on the webinar today?
Well, we're waiting for questions to come in, Elizabeth. So at the moment, there's none being chatted in, but because I thought it really was a tremendously comprehensive webinar, and I'm sure it was thought-provoking. But on these events, people are a little reticent sometimes to ask questions. But I'd like to get some insights from you on, because you talked a lot about salespeople and them bringing ideas to upper management. And of course, it's often met with reticence, because that maybe anecdote provided by the salesperson isn't really established and brought to them along with any customer feedback, like what customers are really going to be impacted by this, to give that business owner some confidence that this investment is worthwhile. Can you talk a little bit more? I know you touched on this, but maybe any particular market segment that you think has been uniquely benefiting from inkjet, and maybe some of the reasons of why those salespeople are being able to more effectively make that message to get their companies to move towards that solution.
Sure, sure. Well, that I think that's potentially a whole other webinar, but I'll touch on a few things here. You said a couple things that are important. So one is that the salespeople often have ideas because they've been talking to the customer, and that's where you want to start, is like, hey, either the customer is doing something already and you're not getting that business, and how can you get that business? And it may be that you can do something more efficiently, um, in a slightly different way, because you don't always want to be just saying, hey, come to us, we can print it cheaper. You want to be able to say, come to us, we can print it better, we can personalize it, we can version it, we can finish it in a different way, we can mail it in a different way. What can you do that's different? And the salespeople have to understand that. So some examples that I've heard recently were, an RFP came in for, I believe it was explanations of benefits, um, or no, the explanations of coverage, and there can be very long, complex documents. And one of the operators said, hey, if we reformat this a little bit, we can print this rather than a whole bunch of pieces that have to be put together. We can print this as one complete unit on this roll fed press and finish it all together and, put a cover on it. And that will allow us to version it, to, do any localization on it, but get it out to market faster and cheaper. And so they sat down and they sat around the table and they worked it out and they whiteboarded it and they made it happen and they ended up, they won the bid. Another company I know had a similar story where they didn't bid on an RFP, and because they didn't have kind of the pick and pack approach that the RFP was looking at, and then came back later and were able to win back the business by saying, yeah, you asked for something and we couldn't respond to what you were asking for, but we're going to present to you a better way to do it. Are you open to looking at that?
Yeah.
And they were successful. Another aspect is I mentioned some of the packaging and labels. There are all of these direct to consumer brands coming in. So we're seeing commercial printers and print for pay get into some of the packaging aspects for smaller companies. And they may print everything for them. They may print their brochures, and they can put their small run labels together, and they need to be able to print on a whole bunch of different substrates. So that may be an opportunity. The salesperson says, can we do this? Is this worth investing in? So some of that you can look at and say, I have a press, what else can I do with it, as we mentioned. In other cases, you may be saying, this is something else my customer needs. Do I want to invest in that? And when you're looking at that latter example, that may be something where you want to go out and you want to get some outside help to look and evaluate it and say, how big is this market? What does the competition look like? How does my positioning or my company play into that market? Where's the gap analysis in what I have for either my technology, my workflow, understanding the lingo of that market? So you may need a little bit of outside help with that, but that doesn't mean like a major, full market assessment. It may be maybe 3 or 4 days with a consultant, like some of the folks that I work with, or others on the market. So
Great.
I can't see you, so I don't have any nodding heads to tell me if I've answered your question or not. Are there other markets you want me to touch on, or?
I think the fact is, what I'd like to share though is that, I know you touched on that, but then you also, you didn't ask me to do this, but a lot of that information is on your site at Inkjet Insight. And I know you've got case studies and you've got templates, and I think it's a terrific offering that you're giving people 90 days free access into that, based upon their registration into this webinar. So I think that's probably enough for me, because I think people need to be able to sit down, log in when they have time to really take this information and relate it to their own company. So I appreciate that you've made that available to them and allowing people to do that.
Yeah, we are happy to have the opportunity to share it with your members, and we love talking to people. So if we also like to interview people and do case studies and things like that, and that can be good for your own marketing as well, to put that out on the site. We're actually headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota, so I noticed that there were a number of people based out in that area. So happy to send a camera and talk to folks. But yeah, if you take the time to go out on the site, there's a lot of things out there looking at markets, saying, what matters, what to understand about the technology, but also what to understand about the market. And we like to take a swipe at things and say, what's the market look like? What's the technology that's serving the market? What's the workflow that you have to understand for the market? Because all of those things play a role in whether it's a fit for you.
Great. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your expertise and your willingness to share it with our audience today. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing you again soon, since we're in the same city. Well, at least I am in your headquarters. I hope to run into you soon.
That's great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Appreciate your attendance today. Take care. See you the next time on the Smart Cafe.